think so. So let's see. You say you had an ideal childhood growing up in Florida. In what way did you mean that?
Wow. Well, I was in St. Petersburg, Florida, which at that time was literally known as the city of the green benches. They had benches all around because there was such a retirement community down there. But all of them had on their minds, besides relaxing and sitting in the sun, that they really needed to take care of their youth. So there were huge opportunities for youth. It was just very idyllic. I mean, I went to high school where you could come in and say, "Mr. Evans, it's just too beautiful out there. I just have to go fishing." And he'd say, "Go ahead, Mark." And off
So
I would
different
go.
from my high school.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, I mean, in those days, they would also, if you stepped out of line, I mean, they'd paddle you and, all that, but they were friends and tremendously respected. So it was just kind of ideal. And, I had a mom who told me I was smart and funny and clever and handsome and could do anything in the world. And I never disagreed with my mother.
Well, you mentioned fishing, and I know you're an ardent fisherman and love hunting. Did you grow up with those activities?
Fishing, yes. Hunting, no. No, I didn't hunt at all until I got to Alaska. But fishing, you're talking about this is back in the days of leather helmets. I mean, gasoline 13 cents a gallon. That always has people kind of. But if you mowed a lawn in Florida in that horrible heat, you could get, depending on the size of the lawn, you could get 25 cents or 50 cents to mow a lawn in 95-degree heat. But you could go fishing for a thing, we called them speckled trout. It's actually a spotted weakfish, but in any case, Pinellas Seafood would pay you 25 cents a pound for that thing, raw, uncleaned, and everything else. So you go out there, have a great day fishing. We rode all the time, so that kind of helped build you up a little bit for football and everything. And you'd make, by the time we split it, you'd make like 2 1/4. Well, my God, you would have, mowed yourself into oblivion for 2 1/4. It was pretty wonderful, actually.
Now, is this true that in 8th grade you spotted your future wife, Patty, and
Absolutely
said,
true.
"I'm going to marry her"?
Absolutely true. Yeah. I was walking along with a buddy by the name of Rick Viet, and I said, "Rick, who is that girl over there?" And so her name's Patty Behrens, and I said, "Believe I'll marry that one." Now, of course, this is back where nobody has had a date by the 8th grade. I mean, nobody. And we actually had a date in the 9th grade. My mom took us to the dance.
And a number of your cohort in West Point also had high school sweethearts, right?
It was pretty much the trend.
Yeah.
Pretty much the trend.
Well, let's talk about that. Now, what a prestigious place to go to college. How did that work out? Had that always been an aim for you?
No, it really hadn't, and I had kind of the whole wrong image, I guess, of West Point. This is a time where, like 3 years before I graduated, Pete Dawkins is on the cover of Time magazine. I mean, this all-American Heisman Trophy winner, West Point, I mean, just this god, And so, but what happened in those days, and it's thank goodness, because I have no idea what would have happened today. I feel terribly sorry for the people who were in that circumstance. I was far and away the best running back in the state of Florida. I mean, what would happen today is you'd be McDonald's All-American and all this kind of. In those days, Bear Bryant, Alabama, was defending national champions. He signed me. And so I was going to go. But then West Point said, "We'd like to come here if you can get an appointment." Well, I mean, the idea of going to West Point, it was no contest at that stage of the game. I just said, I'd really rather go to West Point.
Whoa, wait. Your dad was a Naval Reserve
Right.
officer. What gives? I mean...
Last time he ever rooted for Navy.
Well, West Point is known for not only producing strong academic leaders, but leaders in the big L, capital L of that word. How did they go about that? What did you learn at West Point about leadership?
Well, there's a number of things that you learn. I mean, first of all, it's just as simple as this. They work at it. The Army works at it. Every single year of my 31 years, many times a year for the 4 years. You were rated by peers. You were rated by your company tactical officer. You were rated by commissioned officers. You were rated by non-commissioned officers. How's this guy doing? What is this? How is his style? How is his commitment? Physical? What's his physical? I mean, on and on and on. They work at it hard. And leadership is a skill set to be developed over time. It's not something books aren't bad, but the practice ultimately will make this happen. What happens with that interaction of listening to people who have observed your leadership and understanding some of them one day will be subordinates, non-commissioned officers. Okay, how am I doing here? What's going to happen out there when I'm now an officer and these guys are working for me? How do you treat subordinates? And I think what grows overwhelmingly is this sense of the unbelievable value that you see spread across an organization in other than leadership positions. The skill sets of each of these individuals are wonderful and equal to your own and surpassing your own. Suddenly leadership becomes, how do I find them? How do I encourage them? How do I reward them for doing the things that they want to do? Left to their own devices, they will self-form into an instrument of excellence. Mm-hmm. And with any kind of encouragement, with any kind of recognition, they're just incredible. And that was the most powerful lesson of leadership, is that you have so much talent before you, especially in an organization that's as huge as this one is. I mean, you look at that building over there, you got a couple of hundred people working in that building. My God, they're incredible who they are and what they can do. And you need to know them. You need to get to know them and to understand them. It's a great form of humility, because it doesn't matter what your status is. So you're a general, so you're a big shot. No, you're not. You're a president, you're a big shot. Go down and take a look. You got over there in that building, you got a couple of people who are concert pianists. You got a couple of people who have PhDs in voice. You've got a stand-up comedian or two, a couple of MCs, all kinds of string quartets and jazz bands. And that's just in the Butrovich building. And you look at that and say, I guess I really don't have a hammerlock on all the skill sets here. And it helps you to lead when you celebrate the excellence of the people who are working for you,
Well, when you emerged from West Point, you really had a trial by fire to test out those leadership skills, because you and so many others
Right.
served in Vietnam.
Right.
And I often think about this line about the Mercury astronauts. There's a scene in The Right Stuff where one wife says about a corporate executive who says, when they go into the office, they say it's a war zone in there. But when my husband goes out,
Yeah.
I don't know if he's going to come back.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, when you talk about leadership and learning how to, grace under fire, that's where you must learn it.
Well, it certainly brings you face to face with the results of decisions. But it's always true. I mean, it's just different in the magnitude. I mean, you make a bad call and it can kill somebody, as opposed to making a bad call and it slows down your organization, or it stops them from being excellent in a way you can. The problem is the first one is something that you'll carry with you for the rest of your life, where the second one, most people will forgive you if you just go, oh, sorry, seemed like a good idea at the time. You know, that kind of people will let you off very easily as long as you don't try to fox them. I mean, if you screwed up, tell them. The problems, of course, with war is that it's just so terribly permanent. That's the thing.
Yeah.
that happens.
Well, I'm really interested, you really target your work in El Salvador as a peacemaker, as the high point in your career. Talk a little bit about what happened there and in Somalia, because the results long term were very different
Very
between
different.
those.
Very, very different. Well, I'll tell you, it was exciting for several reasons, one of which was it turned out okay. I mean, especially, El Salvador, I don't think with any close comparison, is the greatest example of a peace ultimately monitored by the United Nations. The guerrilla force ended up electing the mayor of San Salvador and then ultimately elected the president of the country. I mean, so rebels turn into politicians and ultimately it all works out. So it worked out beautifully, and that obviously makes you feel different. But the whole experience was trying to find comfort in a circumstance where I had no more idea than a chicken what I was doing. I mean, there are no books on this. And you'd think the State Department, they have no books on how you make peace. They actually are a terribly aggressive organization. I mean, they have these weapons. They can hurt you with economically, they can hurt you politically, they can hurt you militarily, and this kind of thing. And they end up, and I've teased about this, but I swear it's true. I mean, they have this carrot and stick approach, and the way they work it, very typically, is they beat them with the carrots and make them eat the sticks. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. But some other things happen there. You're talking to people, and so here's this guerrilla, Hercules was his nom de guerre, and we got along pretty well. Guy had been wounded 5 times, lost 3 wives while he's fighting. He'd been a school teacher before he went there. And ultimately human being. I mean, he was a human being. That's all there was to it. And we could talk, and we could understand each other. We could chide each other if that sounded like a threat, that kind of thing, and move back and forth. And that ultimately gave to me, others may have had this prior, but it gave to me a kind of an insight into humanity that is very comforting. I mean, I think you can just about talk to anyone, ultimately.
Well, so when you came, let's move on to the university, because I was going to observe that the Army has a tradition of team building and chain of command. The university really honors critical thinking, independence of thought, sort of being contrarian. And so very different sort of institutions in many ways. What made you think, based on your experience in the Army, that you'd be a good fit as the University of Alaska president?
I think it was my mother's fault. I mean, I just kind of thought I could do about anything.
Yeah.
And then you had the other thing, where you have this magnificent institution that part of the paucity of master's degree students meant you had very few TAs. So you've got full professors teaching classes to freshmen. Just classes that private universities would have advertised and begged for in terms of class sizes. So all of the reason and all of the facts were on the side of this is a great institution. And it was unbelievably cheap in those days, especially. And we just needed to get people there to it. So I told Wendy we were going to get our average student in about 2 years. Okay, we're going to take care of these primarily ladies. Because I said, I'm going to start a program that the governor or the legislature will snatch from us in 2 years. They'll say, that's so good that I want to own it, I want to put my name on it, I want to fund it. And so we started the Alaska Scholars Program and thought it through. I want to go for the top 10% of every high school in the state because I don't want them dominated by the top ACTs, SATs from Anchorage, Juneau, and Fairbanks, which is what would have happened, almost certainly. By getting the top ones from every high school in the state, you also managed to get some from every single legislative district, every senatorial district in the entire state. So you've got some enormous coverage out there. You've got at least a couple of fans in every single district, which will help you get into the office a little easier. And it worked except for my mistake in assuming that the legislature would grab this, make them, I mean, I suggested it many times. I mean, call them legislative scholars, call them governor's scholars, and they all went, no, that's fine, go ahead and keep them. So we never kind of got to get to that second step, which I think would have been a good one.
Well, and the other point that I want to make, that you immediately sort of were able to reverse the decline in funding, and it had been a long period, about a decade, I'm guessing.
It was about a decade, yeah.
Yeah, of declining support from Juneau, and you reversed that. And am I right in assuming that one of those leadership skills, when you were talking to Jeannie, you mentioned about the importance of forming a team beneath you and having that, and then allowing you to move forward with these initiatives? Would that be an instance where you think that past experience might have come into play? And talk about that effort to work with the legislature.
Okay, well, there's a series of things, and one of the things I talked with Jim Johnson about this very often. I mean, remember I told you the Army works at this, you know, the leadership thing. Well, being part of that and living with it all the time, I mean, I do a continuing assessment of kind of my leadership, and you have to be very brutally honest with yourself. I mean, did I do something wonderful, or was it just the circumstances? I mean, you really have to be honest about it. Well, we had a series of fantastic circumstances. We had a very conservative legislature who was just tickled pink that they didn't have to talk to an academic. They actually had a general in charge of it, okay? It's true. I mean, they really kind of welcomed me. I knew absolutely nothing about the protocols of talking, even though I actually testified before Congress. There's a lot more little protocol, I mean, through the chair, come on. Anyway, I had none of that, didn't understand all of it, so I got to brief them, and I just put a chart up there and just went through this chart and said, you're killing us. You're absolutely killing us. You owe this university $50 million. Now, don't give it to me, because we'll choke to death on it. So I'll settle for 16.3. That's about what I think we can develop. And that's just the way I talked to them. And they kind of thought it was good. They could have said, I could have been very insulted. It could have been a disaster. Then we had a governor. We have a governor who's a Democratic governor, Republican, so he can't get anything done. Sat down and I talked with Tony Knowles. And I said, you know what, Governor, you get done with this whole thing, you're going to have all the same problems you got right now. Okay? It's very difficult for you to fix some of the issues that are at that state. But I said, you know what, you and I can fix the university. And here's the deal. I will make sure the regents never go crazy and embarrass you by asking for too much. Your part of the deal is, whatever they ask, you will put in your budget. And we shook on it, and he did. So every year we went in there with the regent's request reflected by the endorsement of the governor. It gives you a lot better chance to break forward. But the good breaks aren't over yet, okay? Knowles passed, and I've been a Republican all my life, but I mean, I'd vote for Tony Knowles tomorrow. I mean, I thought he was fantastic. He signs the thing that says that the oil companies have to give a certain percentage of their profits to the university. So I was in the first meeting, sat down with him, we talked, said, okay, and I very dutifully said, if you have the opportunity, I mean, you give the university some money. You have the opportunity to say how that's spent. You can say, I want this money spent on the petroleum engineering program or something like that. And they said, no, we just thought, we just give it to you. Well, my God, I mean, there's all kinds of jokes about herding cats. If you got a big sack full of catnip, it's not a problem. Okay, guys, here's what we're going to spend money on. The programs that do boom, 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 boom. That's where we're going to spend the money on. If you have a program that fits that, bring it on. If you don't apply. And people responded because they can do. I mean, you challenge that faculty to do anything, they could do it. They could do it. They were tremendous, and we tried to get people on our side. Okay, we have the students, and they were kind of on our side. Then we tried to get the people who hire our graduates on our side, and they were thrilled with that. I mean,
Well, yeah, you forged a lot of great partnership with commerce and industry in order to identify the needs of the state, didn't you?
I'll tell you what we did. We went to the Department of Labor, here's our most needed jobs in the state, and we kind of put those out again to the faculties. Can we address any of these? Obviously, nursing was the first. I mean, I literally have sat over here at the hospital, and they, because it was a nice gesture, threw a checkbook in the middle of the conference table and said, we need more nurses, what'll it take? And in this case, we actually did that. We actually get more nurses, ramped that up. Engineers were a similar thing. It was harder to do the engineers, much harder. It was harder to get a second bite of people who were prepared to do it. That's why those began. We had the facilities, we had the professors, we didn't have the crop of bright kids who could do it. But just trying to get people on your side. And it was all about that simple. I had plenty of time to go out and try to make friends and influence people, because the organization, the talent here was absolutely unbelievable. I mean, Wendy Redmond could have run the university by herself. Actually, Darlene Meyer probably could have run it by herself and would have had Wendy to help her. And everything was just kind of stacked, I mean, we have Pat Pitney, great budget person, and right behind her is Michelle Rizek. Okay, and so you got J.Mo Parrish and the thing, but behind him you got Hostina. You got Jim Lynch, and then we have to bring in
Myron Dosh.
No, Dosh was, but Myron was there, but in the meantime, we get Joe Beadle in there. I mean, sure. So the whole thing was, I got Jim Johnson, Chief of Staff, Jim, I'm surrounded by all these people who are, this is not a joke, this isn't any humility. I mean, these people are a lot smarter than I am, every one of them. And I had 4, 5, 6 of them out there that really could make this thing run. So, okay, well, you go do it. I'm pretty good at chatting with people. So I'll go chat, and you run the university. That's pretty much what happened.
Well, one other piece that I want to acknowledge, because they don't often get recognized, are the regents. And I'm guessing at some point when you're talking about all the pieces that have to be in play and work together. And you've always seemed to have, with the Board of Regents, good working relationships. So they must be integral, too, to the overall success of the program.
Jeannie, are you smiling? These are wonderful people who care a great deal, and given the qualifications for being a regent, can't possibly know enough to be much more than an advocate. That's kind of it. So you give them all kinds of respect for the fact that, I mean, this is a long, 8 years, multiple times a year. This is tough. I mean, you gotta feel something for people who are willing to give it. But they have to be a little bit controlled. I mean, a little bit, they have to understand the ramifications of their decisions. And I have seen some actually really close ones that were turned at the last second that you just shake your head and say, that's just unbelievable that anybody would even considered doing that. So I was always a little, I felt like I was defusing a bomb most of the time with them. As much as I respect them, and I do.
Yeah.
They were different human beings when they were in a crowd with the students listening or open mic or something, a different group of people.
Yeah. Well, I want to turn now to more perennial issues, and one of them is, I think, two sides of the same coin. When we ask students to come to the university, we really want to present opportunities, open the world to them, explore possibilities they might. In essence, we want to provoke and challenge assumptions and make that. And yet right now, it seems from either side, the left or the right, political correctness or the ability of freedom of speech on campuses is being challenged like never before. Do you have any insight into that, or do you have any thoughts regarding that?
Oh, I have thoughts. I think the first thing I would do is I'd make the very first course as a freshman student in understanding the concept of irony. Because I watched the efforts, and okay, you must have noticed that. You must have noticed that you are specifically naming yourself and challenging a concept of fascism, but you're dressed in the same exact historical uniforms that they were, and you're using the same tactics. Did you see that? Did you switcheroo on that? That sort of thing. This is horrifying. Anybody who's involved in any shape or form with the concept of higher education, you've got to respect the concept of the dialectic. Thesis meets antithesis, argues, discusses, and through reasons comes to synthesis, which is a step closer to truth. Synthesis becomes a new thesis to which you assign an antithesis, and we just keep going with this. And so that we get to engage lots of minds with lots of different, we're done with regurgitation. Now I want my point of view protected, and I want a safe spot where I can only be surrounded by people who think like I think. Could we check with the irony thing again? What are we doing? This is craziness. That we actually dismiss the idea of freedom of speech. I mean, dismiss. This is a concept which, this is a poll that this beats motherhood, apple pie, sky is blue, and any other question that could possibly be asked. 98% of Americans say, I believe in freedom of speech. I've figured this out. What actually happens is 100% of Americans believe in freedom of speech 98% of the time. Okay? Oh, that freedom of speech. Well, it gets that one. No, you don't get your choice. You're either for it or you're not for it. Very courageous stand made recently by the university. I applaud that. I don't care if it's disgusting. I truly don't. Freedom of speech says what it means what it says, and the idea that somebody should be punished for it, it can't work. It can't be a little punishment. Or we'll just do the investigation, but assignment, don't do the investigation. You know, well, we'll just talk to them. Don't talk to them. They didn't do anything, and you have to believe that. And when we see the kinds of things that are cranked up today, you know, you can't say that, whatever it happens to be. I mean, there used to only be 7, didn't there? When
George Carlin
went after it, there used to only be 7. I don't know how many there are now.
Yeah.
No, as a matter of fact, I'm starting to feel sorry for victims because the cast of victimization has gotten so diverse that it's almost impossible to find yourself a unique niche. You know, why you should really have sympathy for my plight, because it's just enormous. We've now taken on a brand new concept, and I think it's because that the concept of victimization has been so diluted. We have now gone to victimization by proxy, which basically has funneled the biggest contributor currently to global warming, and that is candlelight vigils. So what happens is, to show solidarity with whomever happens to be the victim of the week, you light candles and therefore demonstrate. It's pathetic. The whole thing is pathetic. That we should make victims such a central focus of our attention, that we should trash freedom of speech as though it never existed. This is, I sit with other old men and wonder out loud, is this just because we're old men? Or is this different and catastrophic? And because we're old men, we come up with catastrophic.
Well, the other side of the coin that I want to talk about is even as we bring students to a campus like this in order to provoke them and challenge them and get them to think in new ways and be open to new ideas, we also want to provide a safe environment. And with Title IX violations, with attempts to bring guns on campus, and the perennial one, I can hardly wait to talk to somebody about the tombstone to tradition that's a part of the University of Alaska tradition when beer was banned on campus. Alcohol and how it mixes with the student population is another example. Now, as a college leader, your job is to, in part, make sure that parents and students feel safe even as they explore new ideas and try to exercise freedom of speech. Isn't that right?
Well, there's some issues involved with this, and let's just start with this. Okay, we're not a high school. You're a high school, you actually have a legal concept called local parentis, where you literally have the wherewithal to parent the people there. You might feel, as I do, very, very parental about my students. I mean, I want them to be safe. The question becomes, what are you willing to do to make them? Okay, there will be no alcohol. That would be actually a very easy decision for me. It was one I made early in my life as I was leading these units, and couldn't help but notice that 95% of all the trouble my soldiers got into happened with alcohol. I mean, so you just kind of look at that, and I just didn't drink for years and years. Then I went to El Salvador, and they make their own Coke, and it's just absolutely syrupy. And I tried a beer and said, God, is that good? So I kind of weaned myself back out of it again. But alcohol is not a pleasant event mixed with young minds and high hormones. It just doesn't work very, very well. But I'm not their parents. And you have to understand, you're not their parents. And you can't do things that are parental because part of it is the try it. let's spread your wings a little bit. Let's see what happens. Let's learn from this. Most of these things can ultimately be overcome by reason, by example, by experience. And if you can try to set a stage, certainly for some of the far end things about when you're having drinking parties and assaulting women who are unconscious and this kind of stuff. I mean, that's simply criminal. Okay, we're no longer dealing with social experimentation. We're dealing with a criminal act, and it needs to be crushed, identified, crushed. We won't deal with that. But then to go, okay, so no alcohol, don't think so. Given the alcohol, I'm not afraid of guns. I know a lot about guns. I've used guns. I feel comfortable with guns. But I don't want them on my campus. And as I told the folks who were advocating that at the time, I said, ultimately you would win this at the Supreme Court, and I'll take the case there. I'll fight it as long as I can. And the reason, very simply, is you mix the alcohol with the youth, with the, and it's disconcerting to me what can happen. There's lots of reasons why you shouldn't. I mean, good, solid, logical reasons why you should not have guns on campus, and that is the route that you would have to make to avoid any place that serves alcohol, anything that's near a child care center, et cetera. You could draw the map around the university, and that's what you'd have to do in order not to be carrying in statutory limitations associated with these various things. So it's not practical to do it.
Some other perennial questions that the university faces. We're in the largest state in the nation, and we have been promised land to help finance the university since its inception, and yet we still do not have anywhere near the land that was promised. Any observations that how that played out?
I got a couple of them. I think Frank Murkowski, he tried for almost all of his 20 years to make this happen. He really, really cared about this desperately. And he had it reasonably set up, but frankly, it was pretty much stymied then by a state legislature who wouldn't come through with the trade-off, because it was kind of a, we'll give X and you match it 2X, was pretty much the deal that Frank had set out. There's some reasons not to have it, and just in terms of practicality. And the practicality of it is that it certainly, because they did it anyway, even though we didn't have land, it certainly is a temptation to say, well, why don't you guys just live off your land grant? Well, I mean, I don't know what the high point of our land grants when we were selling trees to the Far East, but it was maybe 8 million, maybe we made in a year, maybe 8 million. Which doesn't even come close to funding the university for any period of time at all. So had we gotten it, we probably would have had to fight that particular fight. You also have the other issue of what are you going to do with the land? Okay, just again, the state, they didn't come up with it. We would have been way down the list in terms of who got to pick first. It wouldn't be settled. If they'd have given first year I was in here, it wouldn't be settled by now. Some of it probably be forest land. Well, we have the 2 largest forests in the entire United States, and we don't sell a single board foot of timber, so I'm not sure that would have worked very well either. So I think we just kind of let that one go. I don't think it's a battle worth fighting, and there's some real, as they say, there's some real downsides if you get it. People go, oh, you're good, you're taken care of. And we're not. It's not how you do it. You don't do it with land grant. You do it with an understanding on the part of the leaders of Alaska that that's how you grow a community and sustain a community, is you have a vibrant university that produces the workers for your state, the leaders for your state, and the politicians ultimately of your state.
One of the challenges of also being a part of the largest state in the union is maintaining satellite campuses throughout the area. They oftentimes have, a marginal student population, and
Right.
yet they cost money. And my next question is about deferred maintenance. You have buildings and whatnot there. Any insight about that aspect of the University of Alaska system?
Yeah, well, let me do with deferred maintenance first, because it's such an easy thing to criticize, except when you're faced with the realities of trying to live off of a budget that's not good enough to meet all things. What you're always going to do is you're going to defer some maintenance. Is it going to cost you more later? Yes. Can I get away with deferring it a year? Yes. As opposed to cut this class or do this thing or something. I don't care who it is. I promise you, everybody ultimately in a budget crunch is going to defer some maintenance. Just going to do it. Not the safety stuff, nothing, obviously. But you're going to do that, and it will always grow. Tried very, very hard. For years, the Board of Regents had as their number one priority, the number one priority was deferred maintenance. And the legislature would just totally, completely ignore it. Completely ignore it. And so I don't know if they're still doing that. It's a nice thing to wave in the breeze. You might want to do that. Talk about the rural campuses. Now, I actually fudged this in my presentation, because what I talked about were not specifically like Kotzebue, okay? What I said, and it was easy to remember. Don't trust these statistics. Michelle might actually know what the new ones are, but this was true when I said it, okay? If you take away Fairbanks, Anchorage, and Juneau, take away those three campuses, all the rest of them cost 1/8 of our budget, deliver 1/2 of our head count, and 1/4, it was 1/8, 1/2, and 1/4 of our tuition, or whatever those actually, been a long time, however those sort out. And that was the statement. Now I'm fudging a little, because that includes the larger rural campuses, community campuses, that actually do very well. But you say, okay, I'm going to do away with this. So what am I going to save? And the answer is, you're not going to save much. And frankly, at that stage, because I didn't know much about protocol early on. I was faced with this the first year, and what I said specifically was, no, I won't close campus. 2, if you make me close the campus, I will resign, and I will spend the rest of my time in Alaska fighting against the university naming itself for a state they will not support. So I was kind of all in on the campuses. Yeah. As soon as you decide this one isn't good enough and that one isn't good enough, it's going to be hard to go back to the legislature and figure out why they can't say you're not good enough and do it yourself. So kind of a misnomer. It's one of those things where people just assume that that's where we're bleeding to death. We're not bleeding to death on our rural campuses, and you can't save enough money to do much if you get rid of them.
The third question to arise from the state side is telecommunications and remote and distance learning. And the university's always pioneered that, but it's just taken off. And right now, I'm assuming that college courses from anywhere in the United States are offered online. And so suddenly it's a bigger pool of competition in a way for the students that we have in state. And it was in your time that this started taking off and really taking on a life of its own.
Well, this is something that obviously we wanted to look into, very quickly, because the reality was that the state of Alaska was absolutely the national leader in this reaching out long distance kind of education. It was all done with telephones and fax machines and this kind of thing, or not the mimeograph machines or whatever. But we were very, very good at it because we had to. Well, then came in this huge wave, and suddenly we can't compete because we didn't have the wire lines. Mm-hmm. You know, the tyranny of linearity has killed us. You know, I mean, Eisenhower puts roads all over the United States, so it doesn't matter if you're in Boise, as long as you're between LA and New York City, somebody will build a highway that goes right through your state. And the same thing happened with fiber optic cable. It just wasn't any coming this way. So dramatically lost our edge as people began to do that. But as you peek into this thing, let me tell you, it's very interesting. First misconception about distance education is that it's somehow cheaper. It's not cheaper at all. What ends up happening, these other courses, by the way, are, I mean, I actually don't knock these. These are for Phoenix and all the ones that, don't knock these. Let me tell you what they sell, though. What they sell is very specific, personal guidance, okay? I mean, you don't even have to sign up for a course. Dial their number, get into it. You're going to have an email tomorrow that says, Robert, I saw you were looking at our coursework. Can we help you? Did you find anything there? Would you give me your phone number? I'll talk to you. Or you sign up, say, hey, you signed up for a Wednesday course. You might know that we also offer these additional courses that will help supplement the course you chose. Plus, on Wednesday, if that's a good day for you, we also have these kinds of courses. And then somebody's going to call you and talk to you. And how are you going the first assignment? Did you take out too many courses? Do you think you do another one? And they're talking to you, real humans back, and you're paying quite a bit of money. Quite a bit of money. But for the people who want that, need that, respond to that, I mean, they're pretty much take them when you can, take them at 2 o'clock in the morning, do what you want. But distance education is not a panacea. It's just, it's something that, frankly, our faculty still is not terribly excited about doing it. Most of them would rather be in a regular classroom and that sort of thing. We have some who do it and do it very well. We have some people that it serves very well. But the idea of saving a bunch of money by going all into that it's a misnomer. At least it was when I was there.
Well, before I open up the questions to the audience, you had such a long and rich career here with the university, and we've only touched, the tip of the iceberg on many of these issues. Are there elements, points, programs, people that stand out for you from your time here as the University of Alaska president that you want to talk about, that no one asks you about, or you think, I wish somebody would ask me about this?
Well, I mean, one of the things that just fascinates me is to look at the team that is currently in charge of the university. I mean, I know the overwhelming majority of these individuals. It's a good team. This is a very, very good team. Very high on the intellect scale of it. Very high on the work effort. Just the amount of time that these people, because I know them and I know their work ethic, and it exceeds my own. There's no question about it. They work very, very, very hard. And I don't meddle on these things at all. I'll tell you what, I learned this in El Salvador. Your alumni will kill you. Okay? I mean, the articles we'd have written by people who had been in El Salvador 3 years before, telling everybody exactly the way it is, and totally wrong. Everything's changed. They haven't got any idea what's going on here. Well, that's be the problem with former presidents. Right? Don't come in there and give any solution. What I say is, I don't know the facts. I know this. I know the team, and it is a magnificent team, and they can lead this university forward, given some kind of break. I mentioned many that I had moving in. There needs to be a break in this, and it could be as esoteric as an epiphany, that people go, "Oh my God, what are we doing?" And maybe we can help that happen a little bit, and maybe we finally resolve, some of the issues associated with this bizarre economy, which we've all known and understood for years. I mean, it's not like Scott Goldsmith didn't tell us 20 years ago. You really need to get something else besides oil because, but we didn't, and there we are. And, but the only times I really ever get asked about the university, that's the way I answer it. It's a great team.
Yeah.
Great team.
Well, hearing you respond that way, I thought I did have one other question for you, and that is when you had your choice of secondary degrees to go for, your master's degree, you went for English. And I have a friend who's an English prof and understandably thinks it's the best subject you can study because you study text, complex characters and conflicted and whatnot. What's your take on why go to English, and has it helped you?
Oh, there's no question. No, I would agree with your friend all the way around. It's been enormously successful. I can tell you, I remember distinctly that I was asked a very similar question by Peter Jennings' crew over in Somalia, and I said, well, I think somewhere between the Bible and William Shakespeare, I've learned enough about humanity to be able to touch these people. And it is nice to understand those things and have gone through it. But the way it actually happened was, what happens at West Point is if you're like really good in a class, they'll write your name down in a little book, and then later on they'll say, how'd you like to come back here? So I was asked back in Spanish, I was asked back in physical education, and asked back in English. And with Spanish, you went to Penn State University, and then you had a year in Madrid, and then the phys ed department said, we'll give you 2 weeks to get in shape. And no, actually, you went to Duke. They had a wonderful thing. If I'd have known now, anyway. And then English just had, well, there was a phone conversation. I called up the head of the department, and I said, okay, you've offered me to come back in English and everything. Where do you want me to go? And they said, well, here's the question. Do you want to be an English professor or do you want to be a soldier? And I said, well, I'm sorry, but I actually want to be a soldier. And he said, well, hell, go anywhere you want. And I said, I'm at Florida State University. He said, wish I were going. So off I went.
And you still write verse, don't you?
Oh, I do. Yeah. I do. And enjoy it. Enjoy it tremendously.
Well, University of Alaska President Emeritus Mark Hamilton, thank you so much for talking with me.
Fun.
I'm going to circulate among the people. If you have questions, I will come with you with the microphone and we can see what we can fit in here in the next few minutes.
President Hamilton, one thing that was not touched on in this conversation about your accomplishments at the U, and I would personally like to thank you, is your Make Students Count award program. I think that's wonderful. We talked about faculty, we talked about your leadership. We didn't necessarily talk entirely about all the staff that meet with the students every single day, the good hard work that they do to help ensure student success, just to help give them good service when they come to any department, whether it's summer sessions, whether it's the bookstore, whether it's accounts payable, the bursar's office, financial aid. So many good people at the university, and your program, I think, really, really helps people strive to do the best that they can to help our students at the University of Alaska. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's one of those awards that I do believe that good institutions reward people who perform in a manner that they support. What happens with the Make Students Count is the individuals it's voted on by peers. And the only thing about the award that's simply true is the people who do this thing and earn the award would do it without the award and without the acknowledgement and everything else. Wonderful, wonderful. The strength of the people, it's very, very hard to exaggerate that. When you had this crumple of a university in 1998, the people we had on that staff, you had sometimes 3 people manning, in this case, in almost every case, it was womaning, a 13-person staff that had shrunk to 3 because some of the skill sets that they had picked up along their ascension, they just kind of kept, well, I did student loans, for a couple of years back in the early 80s, so they picked up that one, and so you got 3 people in a registrar's office. It used to be 13, and this sort of thing. Kind of a fascinating thing, because this, was kind of like a raisin. I mean, it all crumpled up and everything, but boy, a little bit of water on that thing, and it just blossomed. So the skill sets that had been maintained, even though there were so many fewer people, were sufficient to turn the university very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. They responded to that. And that's why, there's no doomsday for me in the university. Sooner or later there will be a change, and that which remains will be capable of responding.
Anybody else? This is actually theater. My handing this, I think this has gone out of power, but just an instance, if it works, please.
Okay, fine. So working at all?
Yeah, but I think we can hear you in this venue, so.
Well, first I'd like to say thank you for covering such broad subject area of your past history with the university, and more than that too. I appreciate that. But one of the conclusions, which I agree with completely, is the world is changing, cultures are changing, the natural environment is changing because of climate change primarily, but for other reasons. And here we are in Alaska, and the one area I think that makes Alaska unique among all of the other states is that we have this tremendous coastline, tremendous importance of renewable resource in the fisheries, and of course salmon at the highlight. And salmon, it's only Alaska and the Russian Far East on the Pacific Rim that, and Canada, and it used to go down to California. We have the Pacific salmon that are bringing all these resources up. Well, this is all what makes Alaska so rich, yet it's not just Alaskan, it's international. It's the North Pacific and the Bering Sea are so important to Alaska, but they're sort of important to the economy of the United States and to many other countries as well. And I don't think we've done an adequate job in the university of, and we don't have adequate assistance from the U.S. government, because it's not just us, Alaska, and the money that we make from the fisheries. It's the rest of the world that's drawing on these resources, really. And we're helping to feed the world with the fisheries, but why don't we have more cooperation between the state and federal government? It seems to me we should have more cooperation. It seems to me that it's a U.S. responsibility, but it's an Alaskan responsibility to try to work collectively with them. It seems to me you might have some ideas, and
Actually, I do, and it's a remarkably long conversation, and so I will find you afterwards and talk to you about it. It happens to be something that I know more than a little about, and it happens to be something about which I'm a little passionate. I will just touch on one thing because I don't want anybody to leave with a possible misunderstanding. Alaska, the state, makes squat from commercial fishing. It costs the state of Alaska more money to manage them than they pay in taxes. Did you hear that clearly? More money to manage them than they pay in taxes. The problem with statehood was we only got the state. Seattle kept the fish. They do feed the world, but they don't feed Alaskans. Alaskans' primary source of protein comes from salmon, and it comes from salmon that they catch. And it's 3 times as much as any other culture. But anyway, I like this subject. We'll talk about it.
Mark,
Paul.
You must often hear parents say, I have a daughter that I was really encouraging to go to UAX, but
Sure.
now, what do you think, Mark? What do you tell them?
Well, I tell them, I tell them this because it's really nice. You know, I tell them that once upon a time there was a university that a lot of people didn't want to go to because they wanted to go outside and go to the university that their parents went to and everything else, but there was a program called the Alaska Scholars Program. It attracted them to it and everything else, and one of them was my current daughter-in-law. So it's a success program that you plan for the future by getting your daughter-in-law to stay in this state so they can marry your son and have a beautiful baby named is Maya, 2.5 months old. That's how I usually answer the question. You know, it still remains all of those qualities that we talked about when we ran into the dilemma before. This is a good university. These are some very, very good professors, very highly motivated to get involved in research, which, by the way, Fairbanks and its research effort saved the university during the time of the desert. There's no question about it. No question about it. I mean, their ability to live off that money made a huge difference to being able to, frankly, pay professors a greater portion of their salaries in other places rather than Fairbanks. So I hope that continues to be that little salvation piece. But it's a great, great institution with everything's good, the size of the classrooms, the quality of the folks, the fact that, again, we still don't have any huge number of graduate students, so there still are a lot of full professors teaching even undergraduate courses. It's just a diamond in the rough. What we've got to beat, and this is the problem with see, there's this evil that goes down in Juneau. They just can't stand to say, I don't believe in higher education and I'm going to cut the university to reflect that particular opinion. What they do is they say, I love the university, but the problem is, and they name off something that is almost always incorrect, minimum of exaggerated, but indicates no understanding of reality, no understanding of the circumstances. You know, they read in USA Today or something like that we were, 290th in graduation within 6 years. Well, hello. I mean, many of our students aren't planning on a baccalaureate. I mean, but they jump on that and say, that's my reason for cutting the university. Well, the great problem is all of those things are out there. I talked to a member, not to be named, I talked to a member of the Board of Regents who, in one exchange, in less than a paragraph of utterance, quoted 3 of these things that I used to call the cocktail party one-liners. These are things that people try to show some intimacy with the circumstance by telling you all the things that are wrong with the university. Serving region. Hit me with 3 of them. So there's 19 years of preaching that didn't work. But that's what we have to fight. Yeah, you have to fight the rumors out there. Because I'm not sure why it is. I think it makes people more comfortable in not supporting the university if they can tag their lack of enthusiasm to some sort of, in this case, fiction. It makes them feel better. I'd recommend anybody to go to the University of Alaska without any doubt. And I actually do that. One of my little retirement things is I'm what's called a civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army, which obviously I care a lot about it, because otherwise I would never take on anything that called me a civilian. But in any case, one of the things that they do there is if a CASA, they call them, if a CASA signs off on this thing, you can get a kid these ROTC scholarships. So I kind of work that, and I talk with your folks up here, Jim, and have talked to them about Major, and I can't remember his name, starts with a B, I think. But in any case, about those kind of, because as I talk to the kid, you want to go here. You really want to go to this university. You're gonna enjoy it, and you're also going to enjoy being a commissioned officer. So. But I do recommend it, and will continue to recommend it.
Larry Hinsman?
Hi, Larry.
I have to start out with a short story. About 15 years ago, I'm Larry Hannon, I'm Vice Chancellor for Research now, but about 15 years ago I was the research scientist here, research professor, and we conducted an experimental forest fire. At that time it was the largest experimental forest fire in the nation, and still is to date. And we were going to burn a very large area out in Poker Flats Research Watershed. And across about 3 miles, there was a Haystack subdivision. And there was quite a bit of concern from the residents in Haystack that we not do this experiment because they were afraid the fire was going to get away and there's going to be damages. And in the state of Alaska, there's a law that if you start a fire intentionally, you have to pay double the damages. And the residents of Haystack could have easily stopped the experiment, could have stopped the project. So I went to see President Hamilton, and we explained all the safety features that we put in place. We cut a black line all the way around the watershed. It was 100 meters wide. We put water tanks all the way around and plumbed it with fire hose the whole distance. We had 100 firefighters on the ground. So we had a lot of safety features in place. And President Hamilton called a news conference and said, "We will pay any damages upon demand." And we did the fire without a hitch. I reported the next day, and President Hamilton, in his President Hamilton way, said, "We're not in the business of risk avoidance, we do risk management." Thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Larry. That sounds actually, that risk avoidance, risk management actually sounds like something Jim Johnson used to talk to me about all the time. Risk management. It's true. Hey, you want to do something safe? Well, sit in your house. I mean, it's probably pretty safe. You want to get a little exciting? Go for it. Miracles out there to be done. Great people to meet. Hell of a life, isn't it? Isn't it a hell of a life? You're my aim. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you.
Well.